Hey everybody, welcome to the recording studios from St. Paul, Minnesota for AP Art History. I'm recording this one for the second time because I screwed up. So second time's a charm. All right, here we go. We're going to head right into it. So this is Christo and his wife's The Gates. They were all put up in Central Park in the fall of 2005. You may remember Christo as that grumpy man who made the bridge across the lake in Italy. He's one and the same. And this is really his last famous one before the one that we saw on the documentary. For about 2 or 3 weeks, you could walk through these gates, probably touch the colorful canvas. And then, of course, he took it all down, made money off of the photographs of it and the conceptual on paper works from it. And then he goes to the next, goes to the next project. Never wants to make more money than just taking into what else, the thing that he does in the future. And yeah, it was a big event in New York City. I wish I would have gone. Here it is from the side. Okay, next we're going to look at Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's probably the most famous memorial in the United States, maybe the world. Famously, she was a grad student in architecture at Yale, heard about the contest for the memorial, and then put in this design, which was obviously influenced by something we've looked at, minimalism. And she won. And there was definitely some racism in the reaction to her. She's a Chinese American. And some of the Vietnam vets didn't appreciate her or her work. They wanted something figurative. There was a compromise. I don't know, maybe 50 yards to the left, there is a figurative sculpture that was done later. There's also a sculpture, a memorial for women that served in Vietnam, particularly the nurses. And all the names of the people that died during the Vietnam War are etched into. I think these are black marble. Yeah, it's black marble. And although it was very controversial in the beginning when it was created in 1982, it seems as though now people appreciate it. Okay, next is Basquiat's Horn Players, 1983. We talked about him already with regards to artists of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And obviously with the title and some of the things that you're seeing, especially to the right and to the left of this triptych, he is connecting into the history of jazz. And I really don't know very many people that don't love Basquiat's works. They're seemingly simplistic, but are not. They have a lot of symbolism, a lot of personal symbolism that we will never perhaps ever know about. And it's very, very sad that he died in the 80s of an overdose. So would have loved to have seen what he would have continued to do as an artist. This is a work by a Korean artist, contemporary artist, who I was not familiar with before the 250 came out in 2016. And this is an example of a particular ink movement in the 1980s. By Zong Sunam. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if it reminds you guys, of Morris Lewis's drip dry method. I'm sure it's very, very far from it. But it just, from my first, view of it, it reminds me of that. And it's involved with poetry, and calligraphy. And there you have it. Now, all of these will not be on the AP exam because the AP exam is 1 through 6 content areas, and this is the 12th. But I wanted to look at these works because it's my favorite part of the 250, and there you have it. That's why we're looking at them today. Okay, this is another artist that I'd seen her work but didn't really know much about it. This is Magdalena Abakanowitz. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Sorry, Adela. Work. And they are usually figurative. They're usually non-gender specific. And so it's a series that she did from 76 to 1980 that was uh, of backs, I guess you could say. And it's made of burlap, resin, wood, nails, and string. Um, and so there you have it. All right. Another artist I didn't know very much about, although, of course, Chinese contemporary arts have been a huge topic in the art world over the last 20 years. What I find interesting about this particular work, it's called A Book from the Sky, is that it's not readable Chinese calligraphy. It's his own personal calligraphy above, below, and then with the sort of precious books in the foreground there. Um, and yeah, so I guess you just kind of have to embrace it. It's an installation piece, and I think it's pretty amazing, actually. Okay, then we go from that to, in my estimation, something sort of insipid with Jeff Koons again. We looked at his balloon dog before. Now we're looking at a sort of Marilyn Monroe hugs a Pink Panther. You'd have to wonder if the people that have the copyright on the Pink Panther appreciated this particular sculpture. And a lot of his themes are sort of infantile, taking the common culture, very much seen as the Andy Warhol of his generation, so on and so forth. Hopefully, he was actually involved in the creation of this thing, but I doubt it. All right, we've already looked at Cindy Sherman, so just remember that she was really the innovator with regards to stage photography, which it was interesting. We looked at a couple of female African American artists who did that on the EMAC, or who were doing that and we saw it on the EMAC. This is her take on Botticelli's Judith and Holofernes. And I love this, as you know, because she was in Italy at the time, is very influenced by Italian Renaissance art. This is a work by somebody that you might have come across more in children's books, because two of her series were made into children's books. One was Tar Beach. This one is Dancing at the Louvre. And this is Faith Ringgold, who's an African-American artist, and she has this sort of alter ego that's a young African-American girl, usually in a yellow dress. And in the backdrop there, you have three different Leonardo da Vinci paintings. And when she gets done with her painting, then she has them made into quilts, which are quite beautiful. I've seen her speak actually in the late 90s. She's still alive and kicking. She's very influential. You wouldn't know it because this quilt is very palatable. But early on in her career in the 60s, she was very much a sort of a militant feminist, and did some works that were really disturbing but made people look at the racism in the United States during the Civil Rights era. So look up some of her more controversial works. This is a work by a Aboriginal woman in Australia. Her name is Emily Kinwari. And this is a very large piece, as you can see here. And it's abstract, and it's full of bold colors. And these days, Aboriginal art, by living artists, it's a huge part of the art market these days. And Australians are, you can talk to James Allen about it, over the last, I don't know, 10 to 15 years have been more embracing and celebratory of Aboriginal people and art. And So I'm glad they put this in here because we do look at Indigenous America, right? So it's, I think, a good thing to look at other areas of the globe and what was going on with some of their indigenous populations. So there you go. This is a work by, I'd say she's in my top 3 to 5 contemporary artists today. This is Shirin Neshet. And she's from Iran. She can't go back ever. She's lived in the United States, I think, and abroad for decades and decades. On the left is an earlier work that she herself says was meant to be controversial and a type of work that provoked certain ideas about Islam, for sure. And then on the right is, I think she's more known for now her films that are generally shown in contemporary art museums, not in a theater, but usually in an installation. And a lot of her films that have now become just incredibly famous are about gender roles in Islam. And I still remember being at the Walker and seeing this particular scene. In Islam, men and women are not supposed to sing together. And so you see this textile fence in between them. She's gone on to actually make feature films. A couple of years ago, actually, I had my students watch one of her feature-length films. And what I love about her is she's really a public artist. She goes out and does a lot of talks. She has a TED Talk, actually, that's really fascinating. And she's really an artist of the world and worthy of your attention. This is a work by Pepe Nazario, and he is from Puerto Rico. And it's an installation piece that is connected to the barbershop culture within Puerto Rican street culture and such. And I really like his stuff. I saw a major installation of his at the Walker a number of years ago. It was a prison cell, and then a young boy was on a video talking about how much he missed his father, who was being incarcerated. And then I think the father actually talks on that video as well. But this is an example of, in this global contemporary segment of the 250, we're seeing lots of works of art that reflect the particular artist's experience. So this is a great example of that. We've already looked at this work before in Art of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. This is Nam June Paik. Remember, he's from Korea, and he is the grandfather of all video art. One of the most famous pieces is actually at the Walker. It's called TV Cello, and there was a celloist who performed nude and played the cello that had early, very, very small TVs on it. I have a book on her, actually, that I haven't read yet. I should read that this summer. So it's pretty cool that we have one of his major works. We'll have him on one of our EMACs very shortly. Okay, Bill Viola is getting a lot of attention. There's a new documentary out on him. And this is probably his most famous piece, which I saw in San Francisco a number of years ago, actually. And it is called The Crossing. And it shows a person on fire. And then on the right, a person is just kind of standing there. And then the water comes down, and then it's just a huge, huge gush of water. A number of years ago at MIA, maybe not a number of years, like 2 or 3, there was a Bill Viola major video. And you went into this room, somewhat similar. These people were just standing around, and then all of a sudden there was just a flood of water that was knocking them down. And Bill Viola is somebody that a lot of people have respect for. He has done a lot with Catholic imagery of Jesus in his videos. And he has a video installation actually at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, which I think is what that documentary is talking about, actually. Okay, let's keep going. All right, I think we've talked a little bit about this before. This is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. And it was designed by Frank Gehry. As I mentioned before, this is very similar to our Weizmann Museum on the campus of the University of Minnesota, but ours came first. And it's a very sculptural style on the exterior. It's made of titanium. And he started this whole thing called the Starchitects, that if you have a beautiful, interesting museum built, it'll bring people to your town, in this case in Spain. And now it is on everybody's itinerary. That is an art lover in Europe. They go to it. And so everybody wants Frank Gehry and other Starchitects to make their additions to their museums, or actually make their museums, so that they get the tourist dollars. One complaint about it is that the architecture overwhelms you and you're not necessarily looking at the art inside the museum. But that's always going to be probably an argument with any architect doing a museum. And then here's some blueprints, which is always kind of cool to look at. All right, I'm kind of surprised they put her in here, but they did. This is Maruko Mori, and this is called Pure Land. And this is getting into that whole Japanese sort of interest in childish sort of images. There's a whole theory around it that because they're the only country that had a nuclear bomb explode twice in their territory, that there's sort of this infantile sort of cultural weave throughout Japanese society. She comes from a very rich family, and some of the stuff that she used to do as far as the sculptures were really, really expensive. And she's kind of gone off the radar in the art world. She's not making this type of work anymore, is what I know. But anyways, I was just kind of surprised this was in the 250, but she's kind of fun. I actually have a postcard of this, so it's not like I don't like her work. And then this is somebody that we've just very quickly talked about, Kiki Smith. You will remember that when I was talking about the minimalists, I talked about her dad, Tony Smith, and then I talked about her saying that she was the opposite of a minimalist artist. And you saw a work in which a woman was coming out of a deer, I think. And then this is Lying with the Wolf, 2001. And we will see Kiki Smith on an EMAC coming to you soon. She's still making great works. She's definitely a mixed media person. She did this thing that was a pietà with her cat. The pietà is from Italian Renaissance art culture, in which Mary is holding the dead body of Christ, and instead of holding the dead body of Christ, Kiki Smith is holding her cat. It's worth looking at some point in your life. So that's Kiki Smith. And then Kara Walker, we've talked about her pretty extensively as well. This is one of her somewhat later, but not really, silhouette works. An interesting story I might have related to you guys before. So when the Walker opened back up after its edition, they had bought a Kara Walker work that a German museum had commissioned, but it was so disturbing, showing sexual and physical violence against African slaves, that they couldn't purchase it. So the Walker stepped in and purchased one of Kara Walker's works. So that's interesting. Look at this. That's kind of a different view of it. And then you know a little bit because we did an EMAC with I've always pronounced it differently, but it's Yinka Shoniberi, MBE, and now he's an RA, so he's from the Royal Academy. But MBE talks about this in his Art 21 video. Um, it's something that's, what is it, master of the British Empire, member of the British Empire, and he always puts that at the back of his name because he finds it very interesting. He's actually a Republican. Now, a Republican in Britain is somebody that wants to see the aristocracy done away with. It has nothing to do with the Republicans of the United States. Oh, yeah, I don't think it does. So he puts that MBE in there as sort of a satirical commentary on him. I would say he's probably one of the most famous artists working today in the world. I don't think that's an overstatement. This is obviously his take off of Fragonard's The Swing, and he uses the Dutch cloth in mostly all of his stuff, and that there's an interesting history to that. Somebody, I think it was the Dutch, tried to introduce this cloth to areas of Southeast Asia. It didn't take, and so they brought it over to Africa, and then the textile design really did become popular among certain parts of Africa. And so he's from Nigeria, and he's an endlessly fascinating person. I really have an incredible amount of admiration for Yinka Shoniberi. This is a work by El Antasui. He's Ghanaian, but he actually has been working in Nigeria most of his life. And this is a textile made out of flattened beer bottle caps. The story goes that he saw bags and bags of recyclable beer bottle caps on the side of the road and decided to work with them and make a textile out of them. And I would say about 10 years ago, the art market blew up with him. I mean, everybody was just like, I've got to get one of his pieces. And he's also in Art 21, and he's also has just a whole, we would have watched it if you guys were with me in class, a whole documentary about him. One of the more interesting things is that he does not have instructions for the curators as to how to hang these very, very large textiles. I guess you don't really get a sense of how large they are. Oh, shoot, sorry. They're huge. They take up walls and walls. He allows people to just put them up any way that they want to. And he has a lot of studio assistants who help him with wire, bring the bottle caps together. And it is definitely somewhat of a statement about colonialism because of beer manufacturers, European beer manufacturers, and alcohol within Ghana and Nigeria. I've seen a show of his works in Denver long time ago, but it was just incredible. And he's known for these textiles, these metal textiles, but he also is very much multidisciplinary and does sculptures and other such things. Okay, this is a work by Julie Mehretu, and she's Ethiopian American, and she also works on a very, very large scale. You might have seen one of her works at the Walker. And these are based off of architectural designs for cities and soccer stadiums and some other things. She has a huge show right now on the West Coast. I believe it's in San Francisco. I'm definitely going to get the catalog. Interesting thing about her is she's now gone to much more of a monochromatic palette with black and white and gone away from her colored works, which I have found really interesting. Julie Mehretu. And then last but not least, we're going to look at Wandichi Mutu's work. We've talked a little bit about her before. This is a work called Praying Mantis. She's an Afrofuturist in a lot of her works. So an Afrofuturist is somebody that creates a speculative world or a science fiction world in which the main characters are either from Africa or African American. And you don't necessarily see it in this piece so much, but she oftentimes will put in found object photographs into her works as well. And she also is very, very popular on the market. I believe last semester we looked at her sculptures that are outside the Met. They were just installed last fall. So look that up. And then you know Doris Salcedo if you've done your homework. And so a lot of her work has to do with the violent history, fairly recent violent history of her country, Colombia. And this was an installation at the Tate. And if you know anything about the Tate Modern, it's a museum made out of a former powerhouse or power generating building. And this is her shibboleth. And it's a crack in the floor. Okay, and then you also, if you've been doing your homework, are familiar with the Iraqi female architect, Zaha Hadid. And one of the things, of course, about her that you hopefully learned in the homework is that she was one of these architects that was creating plans, but the buildings were never built. So she was kind of a conceptual architect, and they're out there. They're definitely out there. But once she did this national museum, and she did a building for BMW in Germany. Excuse me. And she's deceased. That's very sad. But her architectural firm is still working, and she's done some incredible sculptural buildings, as you can see in the interior of this one. And then last but not least, we're going to end with Ai Weiwei, for who at a time, I think, was probably the most famous contemporary artist in the world. And this is his installation at the Tate in the same space as Doris Salcedo. And this is his work, Sunflower Seeds. And for, I believe, 3 years, he employed a whole city in China to make these porcelain seeds and then to paint them, hand paint them. And you can see, I mean, there's just, I think it's over 1 million of these seeds that cover the Tate, the very, very large Tate gallery, one of the largest galleries in the world, actually. Pretty comparable to Mass MoCA, actually. And online, you can watch a video about the making of this piece. At first, people could walk on the seeds, but it turned up too much porcelain dust, and so they had to put a barrier there. But it was hugely popular. Now, how do you collect something like that? Well, he would offer to contemporary collectors jars of these seeds. And so, he was making money off of it. Okay, that I think is our last global. Yes, we're done, and I only had to do it twice. Well, I went 15 minutes into the other one, and then had to re-record it. But so that's Global Contemporary. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care.